The thunder of hooves echoed across the plains as Loretta Matthews clutched her worn leather satchel tighter to her chest. 22 years of life, and never had she felt more alone than in this vast, unforgiving territory of Colorado, 1878. The stagecoach had deposited her unceremoniously at the dusty outpost of Redemption Creek 3 days prior, and already she questioned the wisdom of answering that newspaper advertisement for a schoolteacher. "Miss, you best get inside." The shout came from somewhere behind her, but Loretta stood transfixed at the approaching riders, their silhouettes black against the amber sunset. She had read about bandits in her dime novels back in Boston, but never imagined she might encounter them firsthand. The pounding hooves grew louder. Loretta remained frozen, clutching her satchel like a shield. The lead rider slowed his magnificent chestnut stallion to a walk, dust billowing around him as the other men followed suit. His face was partially obscured by a bandana, pulled up against the dust of the trail, but his eyes, piercing blue and startlingly intense, locked with hers. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat as he pulled down the bandana. "These parts ain't safe for a lady to be wandering alone, especially with dusk approaching." Loretta lifted her chin. "I was merely taking an evening constitutional, sir. I assure you I'm quite capable of looking after myself." A smile played at the corners of his mouth as he dismounted in one fluid motion. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years under the western sky. His dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and despite the trail dust coating his clothes, there was something undeniably commanding about his presence. "Lucas Blackwood," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Most folks around here just call me Luke." Loretta hesitated before accepting his handshake. His grip was firm but gentle, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. "Loretta Matthews, the new school teacher." Recognition dawned in his eyes. "Ah, the Boston lady. Word travels fast in Redemption Creek. Welcome to our little corner of nowhere." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she replied formally, withdrawing her hand and trying to ignore the lingering sensation of his touch. Luke glanced at the other riders who had remained mounted. "These are my ranch hands. We're heading back to Blackwood Ranch after delivering some cattle to the railway station." He studied her face with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "You're not quite what folks expected." "And what did they expect, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, a defensive edge to her voice. "Someone older. Someone with spectacles and a permanent frown, not someone so." He paused, seeming to search for the right word. "Young." Loretta straightened her spine. "I assure you my age has no bearing on my qualifications. I graduated at the top of my class at the Boston Teachers College." Luke smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his rugged face. "I meant no offense, Miss Matthews. It's just that Redemption Creek isn't exactly known for attracting young, educated women." One of the ranch hands called out, "Boss, we should get moving if we want to make it back before full dark." Luke nodded but seemed reluctant to leave. "May I escort you back to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house? It truly isn't safe for a lady alone, especially one unfamiliar with our territory." Loretta hesitated. Her instinct was to refuse to prove her independence, but prudence won out. "That would be most kind, Mr. Blackwood." Luke instructed his men to continue to the ranch while he would catch up later. As they rode off, he offered his arm to Loretta. She took it gingerly, acutely aware of the solid muscle beneath his shirt sleeve. "So, Miss Matthews," he said as they began walking toward town, "what brings a refined Boston lady to our humble Redemption Creek?" Loretta considered her answer carefully. "A desire for adventure, perhaps, and the opportunity to make a difference in children's lives." Luke studied her with those intense blue eyes. Adventure, huh? Well, you've certainly come to the right place for that, though I reckon it might not be the sort of adventure you read about in those fancy Eastern books. You presume much about my reading habits, Mr. Blackwood, she replied, though in truth, her trunk did contain several dime novels featuring dashing cowboys and wild frontier adventures. Just an educated guess, he said with a wink that sent an inexplicable flutter through her chest. Folks don't come out west unless they're running from something or chasing after something. His observation hit uncomfortably close to the truth. Loretta was indeed running from the stifling expectations of Boston society, from her father's insistence that at 22 she was becoming a spinster, from the arranged marriage he had begun negotiating with the son of a business associate. And which are you, Mr. Blackwood? Running or chasing? She countered. His smile faded slightly. Bit of both, I reckon. Aren't we all? They reached the edge of town, where gas lamps were being lit along the main street. Redemption Creek was small but growing. A church, general store, saloon, and various other establishments lined the dusty street. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house stood at the far end, a two-story structure with a neat porch and window boxes filled with hardy wildflowers. Will you be attending the town social on Saturday? Luke asked as they approached the boarding house. I wasn't aware there was one, Loretta admitted. First Saturday of every month. Nothing fancy, just music, dancing, and Mrs. Peterson's apple pie. Might be a good way for you to meet the townspeople, including your future students. Loretta nodded. That sounds lovely. I shall plan to attend. They reached the porch steps and Luke released her arm. It's been a pleasure, Miss Matthews, he said, tipping his hat. Perhaps I'll see you at the social. Perhaps, she replied, suddenly shy under his gaze. As she turned to climb the steps, he spoke again. Miss Matthews, she looked back. Yes, Mr. Blackwood. Just a friendly warning, the folks here are good people, but they can be wary of outsiders. Give them time. They'll warm up to you. With that, he turned and walked back toward the hitching post where his horse waited. Loretta watched him go, puzzled by the strange sensation in her chest. She had met countless gentlemen in Boston, been courted by several, yet none had affected her the way this rough cowboy had in just one brief encounter. Shaking off the feeling, Loretta entered the boarding house, unaware that the next few months would change her life forever. The schoolhouse was smaller than Loretta had expected, a single room with rows of wooden desks, a pot-bellied stove, and a small shelf of well-worn books. Still, it was clean and sturdy, with large windows that flooded the space with morning light. She ran her fingers along the teacher's desk, trying to imagine herself standing before a classroom of frontier children. It ain't much, but it's ours, came a voice from the doorway. Loretta turned to find an elderly man with a silvery beard and kind eyes watching her. Mr. Holloway, isn't it? My landlady's husband, he nodded, stepping inside and removing his hat. That's right, miss. My Mabel's been fussing over your arrival for weeks. Says it's high time we got a proper teacher for the young uns. It's a charming schoolhouse, Loretta said sincerely. When was it built? About 5 years back. Before that, lessons were taught in the church when the weather was good and folks' homes when it weren't. He glanced around proudly. Luke Blackwood donated the lumber and most every man in town helped with the building. Mr. Blackwood seems quite influential in Redemption Creek, Loretta observed, remembering their encounter the previous evening. Mr. Holloway chuckled. That's one way of putting it. Blackwood Ranch is the lifeblood of this town. Luke employs half the men, and his cattle drives keep the railroad interested in our little stop. Plus, he's got a good head on his shoulders, serves as unofficial mayor when decisions need making. I see, Loretta murmured, intrigued by this new information. And his family? A shadow passed over Mr. Holloway's face. No family to speak of, except his ranch hands. Parents died when he was just a boy. Raised by his uncle until he was 16, then struck out on his own. Built that ranch from nothing but grit and determination. Before Loretta could inquire further, the door swung open again, and a woman with a stern face and practical dress entered. "There you are, Herbert. I've been looking everywhere for you. Mrs. Peterson needs help with her wagon wheel before the social tomorrow." She noticed Loretta and gave a curt nod. "Miss Matthews, I see you're getting acquainted with your schoolhouse." "Yes, Mrs. Holloway, it's lovely." The older woman sniffed. "It'll do, I suppose. Term starts Monday, and we've got 23 children enrolled, ages 6 to 16. The older boys don't come regular during planting and harvest, mind you." "I understand," Loretta assured her. "I'm looking forward to meeting everyone at the social tomorrow." Mrs. Holloway's expression softened slightly. "Yes, well, it's a good opportunity. I've let the mothers know you'll be there. They're eager to size you up, begging your pardon for the frankness." Loretta smiled. "No offense taken, I expected as much." After the Holloways departed, Loretta spent the afternoon organizing her classroom and reviewing the sparse collection of textbooks. The sun was beginning its descent when she finally locked up and began the short walk back to the boarding house. As she passed the general store, the proprietor, Mr. Jenkins, waved her inside. "Miss Matthews, just the lady I wanted to see, got something for you." Curious, Loretta entered the cluttered shop, its shelves packed with everything from canned goods to tools to fabric bolts. "Came on today's mail coach, Mr. Jenkins said, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. Loretta accepted it with surprise. "Thank you, but I wasn't expecting anything." "Return address says Blackwood Ranch," he noted with raised eyebrows. Loretta felt her cheeks warm under his curious gaze. How strange. "I barely know Mr. Blackwood." Mr. Jenkins merely smiled knowingly. "Luke's a good man. Best in the territory, if you ask me. My boy Tommy would have died of fever 3 winters back if not for Luke riding 15 miles in a blizzard to fetch the doctor." Thanking him, Loretta tucked the package into her satchel and continued her walk, curiosity burning within her. Once safely in her room at the boarding house, she carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a book, a brand new copy of McGuffey's Fifth Eclectic Reader, and a folded note. With trembling fingers she opened it. "Miss Matthews, noticed your schoolhouse was short on reading material. Hope this helps. Looking forward to seeing you at the social. L.B." Loretta ran her fingers over the embossed cover, touched by the thoughtful gesture. It was exactly what her classroom needed, and clearly expensive to order from back east. Why would a man she just met show such generosity? She placed the book on her bedside table and began preparing for dinner, her mind continuously drifting to those intense blue eyes and the enigmatic cowboy who owned them. The town hall was transformed for the social lanterns hung from rafters. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and a small group of musicians tuned their instruments in the corner. Loretta entered wearing her best dress, a modest blue gown that complemented her auburn hair, which she'd pinned up with her mother's pearl combs. Almost immediately, she was surrounded by curious mothers, each introducing themselves and their children with varying degrees of warmth. She smiled and chatted, trying to memorize names and faces, aware that she was being assessed with every word and gesture. "Don't let them intimidate you," a gentle voice said as the crowd dispersed. An elderly woman with bright eyes and silver hair stood before her. "I'm Hazel Peterson, town busybody and baker of pies, at your service." Loretta laughed, instantly warming to the woman. Loretta Matthews, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Peterson. Call me Hazel, dear. Everyone does. She linked her arm through Loretta's. Now, let me introduce you to the people who really matter in this town, the ones who won't judge you for your Eastern ways. For the next hour, Hazel guided Loretta through the social, introducing her to the doctor, the blacksmith, the livery owner, and various other townsfolk. Loretta gradually relaxed, finding most people to be welcoming despite their initial reserve. "He's here," Hazel murmured suddenly, her eyes fixed on the entrance. Loretta turned to see Luke Blackwood stepping through the doorway. He'd cleaned up considerably since their first meeting. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a crisp white shirt under a fine black vest. Several people immediately approached him, shaking his hand and clapping his shoulder. "Most eligible bachelor in 3 counties," Hazel commented with a knowing smile. Though not for lack of trying on the ladies' part. Half the unmarried women here tonight have set their caps for him over the years. "I can't imagine why," Loretta said, trying to sound disinterested despite the flutter in her stomach as Luke's gaze swept the room. Hazel chuckled. "Can't you? Besides being handsome as sin and owner of the biggest ranch around, he's got a heart to match. Helps anyone in need, never asks for anything in return." Before Loretta could respond, Luke's eyes found hers across the room. A smile spread across his face, and he began making his way toward them, politely disengaging from conversations as he moved. "Miss Matthews," he said when he reached them, tipping his hat. "You look lovely this evening." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, and thank you for the book. It was incredibly thoughtful." His smile widened. "Glad you liked it. Figure our children deserve the best education possible." "I see you two have already met," Hazel observed, eyes twinkling. "I'll just go check on my pies." She patted Loretta's arm and disappeared into the crowd, leaving them alone. "I hope you're settling in all right," Luke said, his voice low enough to be heard only by her over the music and chatter. "Everyone has been very kind," Loretta assured him. "Though I get the sense some are reserving judgment until they see how I handle their children." Luke chuckled. "Can't blame them for that. Children are precious out here, the future of our town." The band struck up a lively tune and couples began forming for a dance. Luke hesitated, then extended his hand. "Would you care to dance, Miss Matthews?" Loretta's heart quickened. I'm not familiar with your Western dances. It's not so different from your Eastern ones, I reckon." "Just follow my lead." After a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand in his. Luke led her to the dance floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while holding her other hand in his. The contact sent a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the crowded room. "Just follow my steps," he murmured, beginning to move in time with the music. Loretta was acutely aware of every point where their bodies connected, of his scent soap and leather, and something uniquely him of the strength in his arms as he guided her through the dance. She had danced with men before at Boston socials, but it had never felt like this, never left her breathless and disoriented. "You're a natural," Luke said as they circled the floor. "You're a good teacher," she replied, finding her voice. His eyes held hers. "Speaking of teaching, I hear you start classes on Monday." "Yes. I'm nervous, to be honest. Some of the older boys are nearly my age. They'll respect you if you're firm but fair. These kids aren't like city children, they understand hard work and responsibility. Most have been helping on farms or ranches since they could walk." The music ended and they stopped dancing, though Luke didn't immediately release her. For a moment they stood close, the room seeming to fade around them. Then a throat cleared nearby and they stepped apart. A stern-looking woman in an expensive dress stood watching them, disapproval evident in her pinched features. "Mr. Blackwood," she said coolly, "I believe you promised my Isabel a dance." Luke's expression shifted to polite neutrality. "Of course, Mrs. Montgomery. Miss Matthews, this is Mrs. Montgomery, wife of the bank owner. Mrs. Montgomery, Miss Matthews is our new school teacher." Mrs. Montgomery barely glanced at Loretta. "Charmed, I'm sure. Isabel is waiting, Mr. Blackwood." With an apologetic look at Loretta, Luke allowed himself to be led away to where a pretty young woman in a frilly pink dress waited eagerly. "Don't mind Victoria Montgomery," Hazel said, reappearing at Loretta's side. "She's been trying to make a match between Luke and her daughter for years." "They would make a handsome couple," Loretta observed, watching as Luke politely danced with the girl, keeping a proper distance between them. Hazel snorted. "Beauty is as beauty does, and there's nothing beautiful about the way that girl treats those she considers beneath her. Luke knows it too, which is why he's never shown any interest despite Victoria's machinations." Throughout the evening, Loretta danced with several other men, the young doctor, the blacksmith's son, even Mr. Holloway for a lively reel, but her eyes kept finding Luke in the crowd. Sometimes she would catch him watching her too, a smile playing at his lips before he turned his attention back to his conversation partners. As the night wound down, Loretta found herself by the refreshment table, sipping punch and observing the remaining dancers. Luke appeared beside her, 2 plates of apple pie in hand. "Mrs. Peterson's famous apple pie," he said, offering her a plate. "Can't leave without trying it." "Thank you," she said, accepting the dessert. "I've heard much about it tonight." They stood in comfortable silence, eating their pie and watching the dancers. Finally, Luke spoke. "Would you allow me to escort you home, Miss Matthews? It's getting late." Loretta hesitated. "I wouldn't want to impose. Mrs. Holloway will be heading back soon." "It's no imposition. Besides, it would give us a chance to talk without the entire town watching our every move." His eyes sparkled with humor. Loretta glanced around, noticing several curious gazes quickly averted when she looked their way. "You make a compelling point, Mr. Blackwood." After saying their goodbyes, they stepped out into the cool night air. The streets were quiet, with only the distant sounds of the social behind them and the occasional glow of a lantern in a window. Luke offered his arm, and Loretta took it, grateful for his warmth in the crisp evening. "Did you enjoy your first Redemption Creek social?" Luke asked as they walked. "Very much. Everyone was welcoming." "Well, almost everyone." Luke chuckled. "Mrs. Montgomery is protective of her daughter. Can't fault a mother for that, I suppose. Miss Montgomery seems very accomplished," Loretta said carefully. "She plays piano beautifully and can recite poetry in French," Luke agreed. "Though I've never heard her say a kind word about anyone who works for a living." They walked in silence for a moment before Loretta gathered her courage to ask, "Have you lived in Redemption Creek your whole life, Mr. Blackwood?" Luke shook his head. "Born in Missouri. Came west with my parents when I was 8. They were chasing the dream of free land and open skies." His voice grew quieter. "Lost them both to fever when I was 12. My uncle took me in. He had a small ranch just north of here. Taught me everything I know about cattle and horses." "I'm sorry about your parents," Loretta said softly. "That must have been terribly difficult." "Life out here is hard," Luke said simply. "But it shapes you, makes you appreciate the good times all the more." He glanced at her. "What about you? What made a Boston lady leave comfort and civilization for our dusty little town?" Loretta considered deflecting the question but found herself wanting to share the truth with him. "I was suffocating in Boston. My father is a successful merchant who had very specific plans for my future, none of which included my own desires or ambitions." "And what are those ambitions, Miss Matthews?" "To teach, to make a difference, to see more of the world than just Boston parlors and ballrooms." She hesitated. and to marry for love, not convenience or business advantage if I marry at all." Luke was quiet for a moment. "Those seem like worthy ambitions to me." They reached the boarding house too soon. Luke walked her to the porch steps but didn't ascend them. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Blackwood," Loretta said, reluctant for the evening to end. "Luke," he corrected gently. "I think after sharing pie and life stories, we might use first names at least when it's just us." Loretta smiled. "Luke then, and I'm Loretta." "Loretta," he repeated as if testing the feel of her name. "It suits you, pretty but with strength to it." She felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Will I see you at church tomorrow? Front pew every Sunday," he confirmed with a smile. "Though I imagine you'll be busy meeting all your students and their families." "Perhaps," she agreed, "but I'll look for you." Luke took her hand and, in a gesture that seemed both old-fashioned and intimate, raised it to his lips for a brief kiss. "Good night, Loretta. Sleep well." As he walked away into the darkness, Loretta remained on the porch, her hand tingling where his lips had touched it, her heart beating a rhythm unfamiliar yet thrilling. For the first time since arriving in Redemption Creek, she felt certain she had made the right decision in coming west. The first day of school arrived with clear skies and mild September temperatures. Loretta stood at the schoolhouse door, greeting each child and parent with a warm smile, trying to match names to the faces she'd met at the social and church. By 9 o'clock, all 23 students were seated, ranging from little Emma Jenkins, barely 6 and missing her front teeth, to Thomas Wilson, a lanky 16-year-old who slouched in the back row with an expression that clearly stated he'd rather be anywhere else. "Good morning," Loretta began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm Miss Matthews, your new teacher. I'm delighted to meet all of you and look forward to our year together." She proceeded with assessments to determine each child's level, and by lunchtime had organized them into groups based on their abilities rather than strictly by age. The younger children seemed eager to please, while the older ones remained reserved, watching her with cautious curiosity. After dismissal, Loretta remained at her desk, reviewing her notes and planning the next day's lessons. A knock at the open door made her look up. Luke stood there, hat in hand, a smile playing at his lips. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "What brings you to the schoolhouse?" "Just passing by and thought I'd see how your first day went," he said, stepping inside. "And it's Luke, remember?" Loretta smiled. "Luke. My first day went well, I think. The children are bright and generally well behaved. Even the Wilson boy." Luke asked with a knowing look. "Thomas will come around. He just needs to understand that education has value, even for a young man planning to work the land." Luke nodded approvingly. "You understand more than most. That's exactly the challenge with boys his age out here. They see book learning as something separate from real life. Perhaps if they could see the connection more clearly." Loretta mused, an idea forming. "Luke, would you consider allowing the older students to visit your ranch as an educational excursion? They could learn practical applications of mathematics in measuring pasture land or calculating cattle yields, science in animal husbandry and plant growth." Luke's face lit up. "That's brilliant, Loretta. Yes, absolutely. We could make a day of it, show them the operations. Let them see how reading, writing, and arithmetic apply to running a successful ranch." They spent the next hour planning the excursion, their heads bent close together over Loretta's desk, enthusiasm building as they discussed ways to engage the students. When they finally noticed the lengthening shadows, Luke reluctantly stood. "I should let you get home before Mrs. Holloway sends out a search party," he said. "May I walk you back?" Loretta gathered her things, pleased by the offer. "That would be lovely, thank you." As they walked through town, several people greeted them, their curious glances not lost on Loretta. By the time they reached the boarding house, she felt compelled to address the matter. "People are talking, aren't they?" she asked quietly as they paused at the gate. Luke didn't pretend to misunderstand. Small towns run on gossip. Two unmarried people showing interest in each other is prime fodder. "Is that what we're doing? Showing interest?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Luke held her gaze, his blue eyes serious. "I can only speak for myself, but yes, Loretta, I'm very interested." Her heart skipped. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," he assured her. "Just know that my intentions are honorable, and I'd like to court you properly if you're amenable." Courting. The word hung between them, full of promise and complication. Loretta thought of her position as the town's teacher, of the expectations for her conduct, of the short time she'd known this man. Yet something deep within her recognized him, as if her soul had been waiting for his. "I would like that," she said finally, her voice soft but certain. Luke's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then I'll call on you properly tomorrow evening with Mrs. Holloway's permission, of course. Perhaps we could take a walk after dinner." "I'd enjoy that," Loretta said, her cheeks warm with pleasure. With a tip of his hat and that devastating smile, Luke bid her good evening and departed. Loretta watched him go, her mind spinning with the implications of what had just transpired. A proper courtship with Lucas Blackwood, the most eligible bachelor in the county, if Hazel Peterson was to be believed. Mrs. Holloway was predictably scandalized when Loretta informed her of Luke's intention to call the following evening. "It's highly irregular for a schoolteacher to entertain callers," she huffed, though Loretta detected a hint of excitement beneath the disapproval. "What will people say?" "They'll say the same things they're already saying, I imagine," Loretta replied calmly. "But Mr. Blackwood has assured me his intentions are honorable, and I see no reason not to enjoy his company." Mrs. Holloway's expression softened slightly. "Well, I suppose if anyone is above reproach in this town, it's Luke Blackwood. Still, we'll keep the parlor door open, and I'll be within earshot at all times." True to his word, Luke arrived the following evening, freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes, a small bouquet of wildflowers in hand. After an awkward 15 minutes in Mrs. Holloway's parlor under the landlady's watchful eye, they escaped for their walk, Loretta's arm tucked securely in Luke's. "I apologize for Mrs. Holloway's interrogation," Loretta said once they were a safe distance from the boarding house. "I believe she was determining whether your ranch is profitable enough to support a wife." Luke laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Can't blame her for looking out for you. And for the record, the ranch does quite well. My cattle fetch top prices, and I've been investing in breeding stock to improve the herds." "I wasn't concerned," Loretta assured him, "though I admit I know very little about ranching." "I'd be happy to teach you," he offered, "starting with our school excursion next week. Though I hope you'll visit the ranch before then, perhaps Sunday after church. I could show you around, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Rivera, makes the best Sunday dinner in the territory." "I'd like that very much," Loretta said, pleased by the invitation. As they walked through town in the gathering twilight, Luke pointed out buildings and shared stories about the town's history, how it had started as a simple trading post, grown during the silver boom, and stabilized when ranching and farming proved more sustainable than mining. "And what about you?" Loretta asked. "How did you come to own Blackwood Ranch?" Luke's expression grew thoughtful. "My uncle's place was small, just enough to get by. When he died, I was 18 and determined to build something bigger. Worked as a ranch hand, saved every penny. When the old McDermott place went up for sale after the silver bust, I scraped together enough for a down payment on the land and a small herd. Lived in a one-room cabin for years, working dawn to dusk, reinvesting everything back into the ranch. That's remarkable, Loretta said sincerely. You've accomplished so much at such a young age. 30 isn't so young out here, Luke replied with a wry smile. Most men my age have wives and children by now. The statement hung between them, laden with unspoken questions about their futures. May I ask why you haven't married? Loretta ventured after a moment. Luke was quiet for several steps. Never met anyone who made me want to settle down. The women out here, they're strong and capable, don't get me wrong, but something was always missing. He glanced at her, his eyes reflecting the first evening stars. Until now. Loretta's breath caught at the simple declaration. Luke, we've only just met. You can't possibly know I know what I feel, he interrupted gently. I'm not saying we should rush to the altar tomorrow, just that for the first time I can see that future clearly. With you. They had reached the edge of town, where the main street gave way to open country. Luke stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I'm a direct man, Loretta. Not much for playing games or hiding my feelings. If that makes you uncomfortable, I understand. But I want you to know where I stand. Loretta looked up at him, this man who had walked into her life just days ago yet seemed to understand her in ways no one else ever had. I appreciate your honesty, and I feel something too, something I've never felt before, but I need time, Luke. To be sure. He nodded, his thumbs brushing over her knuckles. Time is something I can give you, just promise me one thing. What's that? Promise you'll be just as honest with me as I'm being with you. If your feelings change either way, you'll tell me. I promise, she whispered. For a moment, they stood in silence, connected by their clasped hands and the growing feeling between them. Then Luke released her hands and offered his arm once more. We should head back before Mrs. Holloway organizes a search party. The week passed in a blur of lessons and planning. Loretta found herself thinking of Luke constantly during class, while grading papers, lying awake at night in her small room at the boarding house. Each evening, he would appear at the schoolhouse door to walk her home, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, a perfect apple from the tree behind his house, wildflowers gathered along the trail. Their conversations ranged from literature to politics to their hopes for Redemption Creek's future. With each passing day, Loretta felt her heart opening further to this thoughtful, intelligent man who defied every stereotype she'd held about Western cowboys. Sunday arrived clear and warm. After church services, where Loretta endured knowing smiles and whispers as Luke escorted her to his pew, they set out for Blackwood Ranch in his buggy. The road wound through rolling hills dotted with pines, climbing gradually until they crested a ridge that revealed a breathtaking vista. Below them stretched a verdant valley, bisected by a sparkling creek. Near the water stood a handsome two-story house with a wide porch, surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and pastures where cattle grazed contentedly. Welcome to Blackwood Ranch, Luke said, pride evident in his voice. It's beautiful, Loretta breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. Luke guided the horses down the slope toward the house. As they approached, Loretta noticed flower beds bordering the path to the front door and curtains in the windows, touches that spoke of a home, not merely a rancher's dwelling. A plump woman with silver-streaked black hair emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Right on time, she called. Dinner's almost ready. Mrs. Rivera, Luke explained as he helped Loretta down from the buggy. She's been with me since I built the house. Best cook in Colorado and not shy about saying so. Mrs. Rivera bustled forward to greet them. So this is your Boston lady, she said, giving Loretta an appraising look before breaking into a warm smile. "Welcome to the ranch, Miss Matthews. The boss hasn't stopped talking about you all week." "Mrs. Rivera," Luke groaned, though his eyes twinkled with good humor. "What? It's the truth," the housekeeper said unapologetically. "Now come inside before the roast dries out. Miguel has taken care of your horse, boss." The house interior was surprisingly refined, polished hardwood floors, comfortable furniture, and bookshelves lined with volumes that made Loretta's heart leap with pleasure. Noting her interest, Luke smiled. "My mother loved books. Started my collection with the few she brought west. I add to it whenever I can." Dinner was served in a dining room with windows overlooking the creek. The food was abundant and delicious: roast beef, vegetables from Mrs. Rivera's garden, fresh bread, and a berry cobbler for dessert. Throughout the meal, Luke shared stories about the ranch, its challenges and triumphs, while Mrs. Rivera interjected with her own colorful commentary. After dinner, Luke took Loretta on a tour of the property. They visited the barn where his prized horses were stabled, the calving pens where the next generation of his herd would be born in spring, and finally, a small rise overlooking the entire valley. "My favorite spot on the whole ranch," Luke said as they stood side by side, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains. "I come here to think, to plan, to dream." Loretta could see why. The view was spectacular: mountains in the distance, the ranch buildings nestled by the creek, cattle dotting the green pastures. A profound sense of peace settled over her. "I can imagine building a life here," she said softly, the words escaping before she could reconsider them. Luke turned to her, his expression serious. "Could you? Really?" Loretta met his gaze. "It's a beautiful place, Luke. You've created something remarkable." "It's not finished," he said. "There's still so much I want to do. Expand the herd, improve the bloodlines, maybe plant an orchard where that south field is." He paused. "But lately, I've been thinking about other things too. A family, children running around the yard, learning to ride, helping with chores." The image was so vivid Loretta could almost hear children's laughter on the breeze. "It sounds wonderful." Luke took her hands in his. "It would be with the right partner." Loretta's heart quickened. "Luke, I'm not proposing," he said quickly. "Not yet. But I want you to know that's where my thoughts are heading, Loretta. I've never felt this way about anyone before." "I haven't either," she admitted. "Everything is happening so fast." "Too fast?" he asked, concern crossing his features. Loretta considered the question. By Boston standards, their courtship was progressing at a scandalous pace. After barely 2 weeks, they were discussing a future together. Yet it didn't feel wrong or rushed. It felt inevitable, as if her journey west had always been leading her to this man, this place. "No," she said finally. "Not too fast, just unexpected. I came to Redemption Creek to teach, to find independence I wasn't looking for." "Love," he supplied when she faltered. The word hung between them, at once terrifying and exhilarating. Loretta hadn't allowed herself to name the feeling growing within her, but Luke had no such hesitation. "Is that what this is?" she whispered. Luke's eyes, bluer than the Colorado sky above them, held her steadily. "I think you know it is. For me, at least." Loretta's breath caught. No man had ever spoken to her so directly, so honestly about his feelings. In Boston, courtship was a dance of subtle hints and carefully worded compliments. Luke's straightforward declaration both thrilled and unnerved her. I think I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the gentle rustling of grass in the breeze. Luke's face transformed with joy. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned down until their faces were inches apart. "Loretta," he murmured, I'd very much like to kiss you right now." Her heart hammered against her ribs. That is, I haven't. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You've never been kissed before." Loretta shook her head, embarrassed by her admission. In Boston, she had been considered peculiar for reaching 22 without accepting any gentleman's advances, but it had never felt right with any of her suitors. Luke's expression softened. "Then let me fix that," he said gently, "and show you what real love feels like." He cupped her face with one hand, his touch reverent, and brushed his lips against hers, the barest whisper of contact that nonetheless sent electricity coursing through her body. When she didn't pull away, he kissed her more firmly, his lips warm and sure against hers. Loretta's eyes fluttered closed as she surrendered to the sensation. His hand slid to the nape of her neck, cradling her head as he deepened the kiss slightly, teaching her with each moment how to respond. Her hands found their way to his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her palms. When they finally parted, Loretta felt transformed, as if something dormant within her had awakened at his touch. Luke rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "Was that acceptable?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice that endeared him to her even more. Loretta laughed softly. "More than acceptable. I believe I might need more practice, though." Luke's answering smile was radiant. "Happy to oblige, Miss Matthews," he murmured before claiming her lips again. This time Loretta was bolder, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed closer. Luke responded with equal fervor, though his embrace remained respectful, his hands never straying where they shouldn't. When they broke apart, the sun was sinking behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "We should head back," Luke said reluctantly. "I promised Mrs. Holloway I'd have you home before dark." As they walked hand in hand down the hill toward the house, Loretta felt as though she were floating. Her first kiss at 22, and it had been everything she'd ever imagined and more. Not because of any particular skill on either of their parts, but because of the emotion behind it. Because it was Luke. On the drive back to town, they spoke little, content to exist in the warm glow of their shared feelings. Luke's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, their fingers intertwining as naturally as if they'd been doing it for years. At the boarding house, Luke helped her down from the buggy and walked her to the door. "I'll see you tomorrow," he promised. "After school?" Loretta nodded. "I'd like that." He kissed her once more, briefly but tenderly, before bidding her good night. As Loretta climbed the stairs to her room, Mrs. Holloway watched with a knowing smile but, for once, kept her opinions to herself. Over the next weeks, Luke courted Loretta with a devotion that became the talk of Redemption Creek. Each day brought some new discovery about each other, some deeper connection. The school excursion to Blackwood Ranch was a resounding success, with even the most reluctant students engaging enthusiastically as Luke demonstrated the practical applications of their studies. October brought crisp mornings and the golden splendor of changing aspen leaves. Loretta settled into her role as teacher, gaining confidence as she won over even her most challenging students. Her evenings and weekends belonged to Luke: walks along the creek, picnics in mountain meadows, quiet conversations by the fire in Mrs. Holloway's parlor. Their kisses grew more frequent, more passionate, though Luke always maintained the boundaries of propriety. It was a dance of growing desire held in check by mutual respect and the constraints of their situation. One Saturday in late October, they rode to a secluded spot in the foothills where a natural hot spring bubbled from the rocks. Luke had brought a picnic, and they sat on a blanket enjoying Mrs. Rivera's fried chicken and apple tarts while discussing plans for the school's Christmas pageant. "What about you?" Loretta asked as they finished their meal. What were your Christmases like as a child? Luke's expression grew nostalgic. Before my parents died, they were magical. Mother would make gingerbread men, and father would find the perfect pine tree. We didn't have much, but they made it special. He paused. After, with my uncle, well, he tried, but he wasn't much for celebrating. Usually just gave me something practical like new boots or a knife. Loretta's heart ached for the boy he'd been. This Christmas will be different, she promised. We'll create new traditions. Luke's eyes brightened at her words. I'd like that, very much. He reached into his jacket pocket. Speaking of Christmas, I have something for you, an early gift, I suppose. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it in her palm. With trembling fingers, Loretta opened it, gasping when a beautiful gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond slid into her hand. It was my mother's, Luke said, his voice husky with emotion. The only thing of value I have from her. My father gave it to her when they decided to come west together to start a new life. Loretta looked up at him, her heart in her throat. Luke. He took her hands in his, the ring nestled between their palms. Loretta Matthews, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards. But I know my heart, and it belongs to you completely. I love your intelligence, your courage, your compassion. I love the way you challenge me to be better, to think deeper. I want to build a life with you, raise children together, grow old together. Tears filled Loretta's eyes as Luke continued, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his face. Will you marry me, Loretta? Will you be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children? Will you make Blackwood Ranch your home? The world seemed to still around them, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a hawk. Even the gentle bubbling of the hot spring faded to background as Loretta considered his words. In the short time she'd known him, Luke had become the center of her world, her truest friend, her first and only love. The thought of a future without him was unimaginable. Yes, she whispered, then more firmly. Yes, Luke, I will marry you. Joy blazed across his features as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant for her hand. Luke pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, Loretta rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. When? She asked simply. As soon as you're ready, Luke replied. Tomorrow, next month, next spring, I'll wait as long as you need. Loretta considered. As a teacher, she had responsibilities to her students and a contract through the end of the school year in May. Yet the thought of waiting that long to begin their life together seemed unbearable. Christmas, she decided. During the school break. It would give us time to prepare and the children could attend. Luke's smile was radiant. Christmas it is. A perfect gift. They remained at the hot spring until late afternoon, discussing their plans, sharing dreams for their future together. When they finally rode back to town, Loretta's cheeks were flushed with happiness, the diamond on her finger catching the last rays of sunlight. News of their engagement spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire. Most reactions were enthusiastic. Hazel Peterson immediately volunteered to bake the wedding cake. Mrs. Holloway wept happy tears and began planning the wedding breakfast. And Loretta's students peppered her with questions about her dress and whether they could all attend the ceremony. Not everyone was pleased, however. Victoria Montgomery's tight-lipped congratulations couldn't hide her disappointment that her daughter had lost the most eligible bachelor in the county. And some parents expressed concern about losing their teacher mid-year, though most were mollified when Loretta assured them she would finish the term, commuting from the ranch each day. The weeks leading up to Christmas were a whirlwind of preparation. Loretta wrote to her parents, expecting disapproval but receiving instead a surprised but supportive response and a promise to send her mother's wedding veil by express mail. Luke threw himself into preparing the ranch house, adding a sewing room for Loretta and expanding the master bedroom. Mrs. Rivera embraced the upcoming changes with enthusiasm, teaching Loretta her recipes and the rhythms of ranch life. "He's been waiting for you," she told Loretta one afternoon as they prepared dinner together. "Even before he knew who you were, there was a space in his heart waiting for you to fill it." As December arrived with its short days and cold nights, Loretta found herself counting the hours until she would become Mrs. Lucas Blackwood. Their stolen moments together became more precious and more challenging, as their desire for each other grew alongside their deepening love. "2 more weeks," Luke whispered one evening as they said goodnight on the boarding house porch, his forehead resting against hers after a particularly fervent kiss. "2 more weeks until I can take you home and never have to say goodnight again." The wedding was set for Christmas Eve, with the entire town invited to the church ceremony and a reception to follow at the town hall. Hazel Peterson and the ladies' auxiliary had transformed the space with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and countless candles. On the morning of her wedding day, Loretta awoke to gently falling snow, the first of the season. It dusted the rooftops and streets of Redemption Creek with diamond-like crystals that sparkled in the winter sunlight. A perfect day, she thought, her heart so full it felt it might burst. Mrs. Holloway and Hazel helped her dress in the simple but elegant white gown they had sewn together, arranging her mother's veil over her auburn curls. "You look beautiful, my dear," Hazel said, her eyes misty. "Luke won't know what hit him." The church bells rang out at noon, calling the townspeople to witness the union of their schoolteacher and their most respected rancher. As Loretta stood at the back of the church on Mr. Holloway's arm, he had offered to give her away in her father's absence. She saw Luke waiting at the altar, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to awe as she began her walk toward him. He had never looked more handsome, his dark hair neatly combed, his Sunday suit freshly pressed, his blue eyes shining with love as they fixed on her. The townspeople faded from Loretta's awareness. In that moment, there was only Luke, the man who had taught her what real love felt like. When she reached him, Luke took her hands in his thumbs brushing reassuringly over her knuckles. "You're breathtaking," he whispered before the minister began the ceremony. Their vows were traditional but spoken with such sincerity that many in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Luke's kiss was tender yet filled with promise, a beginning rather than a culmination. The reception was joyous music, dancing, feasting, and congratulations from the entire community that had become Loretta's extended family. As the evening wore on, Luke leaned close to his new wife. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Blackwood, Mrs. Blackwood." The name still felt new, wonderful. Loretta nodded, suddenly both nervous and eager for their first night together as husband and wife. They said their goodbyes and stepped out into the crisp night air, where Luke's sleigh waited, decorated with ribbons and bells by his ranch hands. A cheer went up from the crowd as he helped her into the sleigh, tucking warm blankets around her before taking the reins. As they glided through the moonlit landscape, snow falling gently around them, Loretta leaned against her husband's strong shoulder. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," she assured him. "It's like a dream." "The best kind," Luke agreed. "The kind that lasts a lifetime." When they reached the ranch, Luke surprised her by sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. The house was warm and welcoming, with a fire crackling in the hearth and fresh flowers on the tables. Mrs. Rivera's touch, though the housekeeper herself had discreetly retired to her quarters in the back wing. Luke set Loretta gently on her feet in the parlor but kept his arms around her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood, he murmured before capturing her lips in a kiss that held none of the restraint of their previous encounters. Loretta responded with equal passion, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed herself against him. After several breathless moments, Luke pulled back slightly, his eyes dark with desire. "Loretta," he said huskily, "I want to make love to you more than I've ever wanted anything, but we can take our time. If you're nervous—" She silenced him with another kiss. "I am nervous," she admitted when they parted. "But I'm also ready, Luke. I want to be your wife in every way." His smile was tender as he scooped her into his arms once more. "Then let me show you what that means," he whispered as he carried her up the stairs to their bedroom. Later, as they lay entwined in the soft darkness, Loretta marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a sheltered Boston schoolteacher with dreams of adventure. Now she was a wife, a rancher's partner, a woman who had found her place in the world not by sacrificing her independence, but by sharing it with a man who valued her mind as much as her heart. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Loretta smiled against his chest. "That coming west was the best decision I ever made." "Second best," he corrected with a grin. "Marrying me was the best," she laughed, the sound full of joy and promise. "You may be right about that, Mr. Blackwood." As snow fell softly outside their window, and the fire burned low in the grate, Loretta and Luke drifted to sleep in each other's arms, their love a warm beacon against the cold winter night and a foundation for all the seasons to come. Spring came to Redemption Creek in a riot of wildflowers and new calves. Loretta finished the school year as promised, though the daily ride to and from town had become more challenging as her body changed with the early stages of pregnancy. Their first child, conceived on their wedding night or shortly thereafter, they supposed was due in late September. Luke was ecstatic about becoming a father, doting on Loretta and already planning expansions to the nursery that had once been his own childhood room. Mrs. Rivera fussed over Loretta's diet and insisted she rest frequently, while the women of Redemption Creek shared advice and hand-me-down baby clothes with the young teacher who had become one of their own. On a warm evening in May, after the last day of the school term, Luke and Loretta sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and purple. Loretta's hand rested on her gently rounded belly, where their child grew stronger each day. "Happy?" Luke asked, his arm around her shoulders. Loretta smiled up at the man who had taught her what real love felt like, who continued to teach her every day with his patience, his passion, his unwavering support. "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied, and kissed him as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. And as the years passed, that happiness only deepened. Their family grew a son named James after Luke's father, followed by twin daughters, Emma and Sarah. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, with Loretta bringing her educational background to the business side while Luke handled the day-to-day operations. They faced challenges, of course, drought years, harsh winters, the normal conflicts of any marriage, but they faced them together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. And each night, no matter how busy or difficult the day had been, they took time to sit together on their porch, watching the sunset over the land they loved, grateful for that fateful moment when a Boston schoolteacher and a Colorado rancher crossed paths on a dusty street in Redemption Creek. In time, their children grew, following their own paths but always returning to the ranch for holidays and family gatherings. James took over more ranch responsibilities as Luke's hair silvered at the temples, while the twins pursued education, Emma as a doctor, Sarah as a teacher like her mother. The ranch expanded, modernized with the new century, yet remained true to the vision Luke and Loretta had shared from the beginning. And on their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and the remaining old-timers of Redemption Creek, Luke took Loretta's hand, still a perfect fit in his after all these years, and led her to their special hillside overlooking the ranch. "You remember our first kiss?" he asked, his blue eyes still bright despite the wrinkles that framed them. "How could I forget?" Loretta replied, her heart warming at the memory. "The day you showed me what real love feels like." "Best thing I ever did," Luke said softly, drawing her close. "Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life." Loretta Blackwood. As the sunset gilded the land they had nurtured together, Luke kissed his wife with the same tenderness he had shown that first time, half a century before. And Loretta knew with absolute certainty that some loves truly do last forever, growing deeper, richer, and more precious with each passing day.